Anna, we've decided to keep Thanksgiving small this year. Just immediate family. My daughter-in-law Melissa's voice was sweet as honey, but her eyes were cold as winter. What she didn't know was that I'd been paying their mortgage for 3 years. So when they banned me from my own family's table, I decided it was time they learned what immediate family really costs. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. I'm Anna Baker, and at 62, I thought I'd seen every kind of family drama there was. I raised 4 children as a single mother after my husband died in a construction accident when I was 35. I worked double shifts at the textile factory, took night classes to become a bookkeeper, and somehow managed to put all my kids through college. My oldest son David was my pride and joy, a successful software engineer who married Melissa 3 years ago. I thought I'd finally reached the peaceful chapter of my life where I could enjoy my grandchildren and watch my family flourish. How wrong I was. The conversation that changed everything happened on a Tuesday morning in early November. I was at their house in Riverside Heights, the upscale neighborhood I'd helped them move into, babysitting my twin granddaughters Emma and Sophie while David was at work and Melissa was at her yoga class. I'd let myself in with the spare key they'd given me, made the girls breakfast, and was cleaning up the kitchen when I heard Melissa's car pull into the driveway earlier than expected. She was on the phone, her voice carrying through the thin walls as she walked up the front steps. I could hear every word clearly as she stood just outside the door, apparently finishing her conversation before coming inside. "No, Mom, we're not doing the big family thing this year," she was saying, her tone exasperated. "David's mother has this way of taking over everything. She acts like she's the matriarch of the family just because she helped us out financially in the beginning. It's suffocating." My hands froze on the dish towel I was holding. The beginning? I'd been paying their $1,500 mortgage every month for 3 years, plus covering their car insurance, health insurance premiums, and, more often than not, their grocery bills. This wasn't help from the beginning, this was ongoing support that kept their entire lifestyle afloat. I know, Melissa continued, her voice getting closer to the door. "David feels guilty about it, but honestly, we need some space. Some boundaries. Anna just assumes she's invited to everything because she thinks money equals family. This Thanksgiving, I want it to be just us, the girls, and maybe your sister's family. No drama, no Anna hovering over the turkey telling me I'm cooking it wrong, no lectures about family traditions." The key turned in the lock, and I quickly busied myself wiping down counters that were already clean. Emma and Sophie were in the living room watching cartoons, completely unaware that their grandmother had just been reduced to a financial burden and family annoyance in their own home. Melissa walked in with her yoga mat slung over her shoulder, her blonde hair pulled back in a perfect ponytail, wearing the expensive athletic wear I'd helped pay for through their credit card bills. She smiled at me with the same bright, fake expression she always wore. "Anna, you're early today. How are my angels?" She dropped her mat by the door and walked over to kiss the girls, who barely looked up from their show. "They're perfect, as always," I managed to say, my voice steady despite the storm brewing in my chest. "I brought them those art supplies you mentioned Sophie wanted. They're on the dining table." "Oh, you didn't have to do that," Melissa said, but she was already walking toward the table to look at the expensive art set I'd bought. "This must have cost a fortune. You really spoil them." I watched her examine the price tag I'd forgotten to remove, saw her eyebrows raise at the $60 cost. 3 years ago, $60 would have been a significant expense for me. Now, thanks to my late husband's life insurance finally maturing and my own careful investments over the decades, I could afford to be generous. The irony was that my financial comfort had somehow made me less welcome in my son's life, not more. "They're my granddaughters," I said simply. "I like making them happy." Melissa nodded, but something in her expression had shifted. She was looking at me differently, like she was calculating something. "David should be home around 6, she said. "Will you be staying for dinner?" It was a polite question, but there was something underneath it. A subtle suggestion that maybe I shouldn't. I'd been staying for dinner at least 3 times a week for the past 2 years, ever since David had casually mentioned that Melissa was struggling with cooking for the family while working part-time at the boutique. I'd started bringing groceries and staying to help with meals, and it had become routine. Our routine. I was planning on it, I said carefully. Unless you have other plans. No, no plans, Melissa replied quickly, too quickly. I just thought maybe you might want to spend some time at home. You're always here helping us out. There it was again, that subtle push toward the door, wrapped in concern for my well-being. I'd been so focused on being helpful, on being needed, that I hadn't noticed how my presence had shifted from welcome to tolerated to barely endured. I suppose I could head home after David gets back, I said, testing the waters. Melissa's relief was almost palpable. That sounds perfect. I know he'll want to catch up with you before you go. I spent the rest of the afternoon playing with Emma and Sophie, helping them with their art projects, reading them stories. But my mind kept drifting back to that phone conversation. Money equals family. The phrase stuck in my throat like a piece of food that wouldn't go down. Is that really how they saw my contributions? Not as love, not as support, but as some kind of transaction that I thought entitled me to family access? When David came home at 6:15, I was packing up the girls' art supplies and getting ready to leave. He looked surprised to see me putting on my coat. Mom, you're not staying for dinner? Melissa made that pasta thing you like. I glanced over at Melissa, who was busy in the kitchen, her back to us. She hadn't made any pasta. She was heating up leftover takeout from the night before, the containers still visible on the counter. I thought I'd give you all some family time, I said, kissing his cheek. I'll see you this weekend. David looked confused, but didn't press. He was tired from work, distracted by the girls demanding his attention, and probably relieved to have one less person to manage in his evening routine. As I drove home to my small but comfortable house across town, I realized that my son hadn't asked me to stay. He'd assumed I was leaving and seemed perfectly fine with it. That night, I sat in my kitchen with a cup of tea and my checkbook, looking at 3 years' worth of bank statements spread across my dining table. The numbers told a story I'd been too emotionally invested to see clearly before. $1,500 a month for their mortgage, $300 for their car insurance, $250 for their health insurance premiums, an average of $400 a month for various other expenses, groceries, utilities when they ran short, car repairs, the girls' activities. I was paying nearly $2,500 a month to support their lifestyle, $30,000 a year. In 3 years, I'd given them close to $90,000, and according to Melissa's phone conversation, this was just help from the beginning, that I was now using to assume family privileges I wasn't entitled to. I thought about David's college graduation, how proud I'd been when he landed his first job at the tech company. His starting salary was decent, around $55,000 a year. When he and Melissa got married, they'd both been working, and I'd assumed they were financially stable. It wasn't until after the twins were preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Born that David had approached me, embarrassed and apologetic, explaining that Melissa wanted to stay home with the babies but they couldn't afford the house payments on his salary alone. Just until I get promoted, Mom, he'd said. Maybe a year, 2 at most. I hate asking, but we really need help. That was 3 years ago. David had been promoted twice. His salary was now well over $70,000 a year. Melissa had gone back to work part-time when the girls started school. By my calculations, they should have been able to cover their expenses months ago, maybe even a year ago. Yet the requests for help had never stopped, and I'd never questioned them because I wanted to be needed. I wanted to be essential to their happiness. But according to Melissa, my contributions weren't making me essential. They were making me suffocating. I pulled out my laptop and started researching something I'd been curious about for months. What was the average mortgage payment for houses in Riverside Heights? According to recent sales data, homes in their neighborhood were selling for between $300,000 and $400,000. With a standard down payment and good credit, a mortgage should run between $1,800 and $2,200 a month. David and Melissa's house had sold for $340,000. I'd helped them with the down payment, contributed $15,000 toward their closing costs. Their mortgage should have been around $1,900 a month, not $1,500. Either they'd put down more money than I knew about, or they'd been lying to me about their monthly payment from the beginning. I spent the next hour digging through online records, property tax information, anything I could find about their house. Public records showed their loan amount, and when I calculated their monthly payment based on current interest rates, the number that came back made my stomach drop. $1,867 per month. They'd been telling me their mortgage was $1,500, and I'd been paying that amount faithfully, believing I was covering their full housing cost. In reality, I was covering about 80% of it, and they'd been paying the difference themselves while telling me they couldn't afford the house without my help. They could afford the house, they'd been able to afford the house for at least a year, probably longer. They'd been taking my money not out of necessity but out of convenience. It was easier to let me pay most of their mortgage than to adjust their lifestyle, give up the expensive coffee, the yoga classes, the frequent date nights, the designer clothes for the girls. I was subsidizing their comfortable life while being told I was too involved in their family. The realization hit me like ice water. I wasn't helping them survive. I was enabling them to live beyond their means while being treated like an unwelcome charity case in return. And now, apparently, I wasn't even welcome at Thanksgiving, the holiday I'd hosted for their family every year since David was born, because my presence was too suffocating for Melissa's taste. I closed my laptop and stared at the stack of bank statements. Tomorrow was November 15th. Thanksgiving was 8 days away. I'd already bought a turkey, planned the menu, prepared my house for hosting. But according to Melissa, I wasn't invited to my own family's celebration because I thought money equaled family. Maybe it was time to find out what family looked like without my money in the equation. I picked up my phone and scrolled to David's number. My finger hovered over the call button for a long moment. Part of me wanted to call him right now, demand an explanation, tell him what I'd overheard and what I'd discovered. But another part of me, the part that had learned patience through decades of single motherhood and careful financial planning, told me to wait. If they wanted Thanksgiving without me, they could have it, but they might find that holidays cost more than they remembered when they're paying for everything themselves. I went to bed that night with a strange sense of calm. For 3 years, I'd been worried about their financial stability, losing sleep over whether they could make ends meet, planning my own budget around their needs. Tonight, for the first time in years, I wasn't worried about their bills. I was curious about what would happen when those bills became entirely their responsibility again. The next morning, I woke up early and made a decision that felt both terrifying and liberating. I was going to stop enabling their lifestyle and start observing how much they really needed me versus how much they simply wanted my money. If Melissa thought I was suffocating when I was helping them, perhaps she'd appreciate some space from my assistance as well as my presence. I made coffee, sat down with my laptop, and began composing an email that would change everything. It wasn't angry or accusatory. It was simply honest about what I'd heard and what I'd discovered. But before I sent it, I wanted to see how they'd handle this Thanksgiving situation. I wanted to know if my son would stand up for me, or if he'd let his wife exclude me from our family tradition without a fight. The next few days would tell me everything I needed to know about where I really stood in my son's life. And depending on what I learned, they might discover exactly how much their comfortable lifestyle had been, depending on the mother they found too suffocating to include in their holidays. 3 days passed without a word from David or Melissa about Thanksgiving. No invitation, no acknowledgement that we'd always spent the holiday together, no explanation for the sudden change in plans. On Friday morning, I was watering my plants when my neighbor Helen knocked on my door. "Anna, honey, I hope you don't mind me asking, but are you doing anything for Thanksgiving? My daughter's family canceled their visit last minute, and I was thinking about ordering one of those prepared dinners from the grocery store. Seems silly to cook a whole turkey for just me." Helen was 78, a widow like me, though she'd lost her husband more recently. We'd been friendly neighbors for 5 years, sharing garden tips and the occasional cup of coffee, but we'd never spent a holiday together. "Actually, my plans just changed too," I heard myself saying. "Would you like to do a small dinner together? I've already got a turkey, and I was looking forward to cooking." Her face lit up. "Oh, that would be wonderful. I'll bring my famous stuffing and that cranberry sauce recipe my mother used to make. It'll be nice to have some company." As I closed the door after making plans with Helen, I realized I felt more genuinely welcome than I had in months. Here was someone who wanted my company for the simple pleasure of sharing a meal and conversation, not because I was useful or because I helped pay for the experience. Saturday morning brought the call I'd been expecting. David's name appeared on my phone screen just after 9 o'clock. "Hey, Mom. What are you up to today?" His voice was casual, normal, like nothing had changed. I wondered if Melissa had told him about her phone conversation with her mother, or if he was still unaware that I knew about their Thanksgiving plans. "Just some errands," I said. "How are the girls?" "They're good. Actually, they've been asking about you. Sophie wants to show you the picture she made with those art supplies you brought." There was something in his tone, a fishing quality, like he was testing to see if I was upset about something. I kept my voice neutral. "That's sweet. I'd love to see it sometime." A pause. "Mom, about Thanksgiving." Here it was. I waited, curious to see how he'd handle this conversation. Would he be honest about Melissa's decision? Would he invite me himself? Would he even acknowledge that we'd spent every Thanksgiving together for the past 33 years? Melissa and I were talking, and we thought it might be nice to do something smaller this year. Just the four of us, you know? Keep it simple. Simple. That was the word he chose. Not intimate, not family-focused, but simple. As if my presence complicated things rather than enriched them. "I see," I said quietly. "That sounds nice for you all." Another pause, longer this time. "You're not upset, are you? I mean, you could always come by for dessert or something." Dessert or something. An afterthought invitation to the meal I'd been planning and hosting for decades. I felt something crack inside my chest, but my voice remained steady. "That's kind of you to offer, but I've already made other plans." Other plans? He sounded genuinely surprised, like it had never occurred to him that I might have options beyond waiting around for their leftover time. "Yes, I'm having dinner with Helen from next door. We decided to do a small celebration together." "Oh?" He paused again. "Well, that's great, Mom. That sounds really nice." But he didn't sound like he thought it was great. He sounded confused. Maybe even a little hurt that I wasn't more disappointed about being excluded from their family dinner. There was something else in his voice too, something I couldn't quite identify. "I should let you go," I said. "Give the girls my love." "Mom, wait." His voice was quick, urgent. "Everything's okay, right? Between us, I mean." It was such a loaded question. Everything wasn't okay, but not in the way he probably thought. Everything was actually becoming clearer than it had been in years. "Everything's fine, David. Enjoy your simple Thanksgiving." After I hung up, I sat with my coffee and thought about that conversation. David knew something was off, but he couldn't quite put his finger on what. He'd expected me to be hurt, maybe even to argue about being excluded. Instead, I'd been pleasant and had made alternative plans. This had clearly thrown him off balance. I spent the weekend deliberately not thinking about their holiday plans. Instead, I focused on preparing for dinner with Helen, researching new recipes, cleaning my house for a guest who actually wanted to be there. It felt good to put energy into something that would be appreciated rather than taken for granted. Monday morning brought an unexpected text from Melissa. "Anna, hope you're having a good week. The girls miss you. Maybe you could come by Wednesday evening for a pre-Thanksgiving visit?" A pre-Thanksgiving visit, like a consolation prize for not being included in the actual holiday. I stared at the text for a long time before responding. "Thanks for thinking of me. I'm actually pretty busy this week preparing for my own Thanksgiving plans. Maybe next weekend." I hit send before I could second-guess myself. Within 10 minutes, my phone rang, Melissa's name on the screen. "Anna, hi! I got your text. Your own Thanksgiving plans?" Her voice was bright and curious, but there was an edge underneath it, like she couldn't quite believe I had plans that didn't revolve around their family. "Yes, I'm having dinner with my neighbor Helen. We're both looking forward to it." "Oh, that's nice." She sounded like she was trying to process this information. "I didn't realize you and Helen were close." "We're getting to know each other better. It's nice to spend time with someone who appreciates company." The line went quiet for a moment. I could almost hear Melissa trying to decode what I meant by that comment. "Well, I just thought, since you usually do such a big Thanksgiving, that maybe you'd want to see the girls before the holiday. They made you cards." Cards they'd made while I wasn't there. Cards that were probably prompted by guilt or obligation rather than genuine affection. The old me would have melted at this mention, would have rearranged my plans to see those cards and spend time with my granddaughters. But something had shifted in me over the past week. That's very sweet of them. I'll make sure to see them soon. What about Wednesday? Melissa pressed. Just for an hour or two? I'm not available Wednesday. I'm preparing for my dinner party. Dinner party? I'd elevated my simple meal with Helen to an event that required preparation time. It wasn't entirely untrue. I was planning to make everything from scratch and wanted it to be special. Anna, is everything okay? You seem different. Different. That was the second time this week someone had noticed a change in me. The difference was that I'd stopped being available whenever they needed something and started having my own priorities. Everything's fine, Melissa. I hope you all have a lovely Thanksgiving. After I hung up, I realized I felt lighter than I had in months. For the first time in years, I wasn't organizing my schedule around their needs, their requests, their last-minute invitations. I was making my own plans and sticking to them. Tuesday brought the most interesting development yet. David called during his lunch break, his voice more serious than usual. Mom, I wanted to talk to you about something. Melissa mentioned you seemed upset about Thanksgiving. Upset isn't the word I'd use, I said honestly. I'm actually looking forward to my plans with Helen. Right, but if you really wanted to join us, I'm sure we could make it work. If I really wanted to join them, they could make it work. Like including me would be a favor they'd reluctantly grant rather than something they genuinely wanted. That's thoughtful but unnecessary. You said you wanted to keep it simple, and I respect that. Mom, you're being weird about this. Weird. Now I was weird for accepting their decision and making alternative plans instead of begging to be included. I'm not being weird, David. I'm being understanding. You and Melissa want a quiet family dinner, and I've arranged to have one too. What's weird about that? It's just, you always host Thanksgiving. It's your thing. My thing, like it was a hobby I'd forced on them rather than a tradition I'd lovingly maintained for decades. I can appreciate Thanksgiving without hosting it. Helen and I are going to have a wonderful time. But what about next year? Are you planning to do this every year now? There was something almost panicked in his voice, like he was suddenly realizing that my stepping back might be permanent, rather than a one-time accommodation. I haven't thought about next year, I said truthfully. I'm focused on enjoying this year's celebration. Mom, I feel like there's something you're not telling me. He was right, of course. There was a lot I wasn't telling him. About the phone conversation I'd overheard. About the mortgage calculations I'd done. About the growing realization that my role in his family had become more about financial convenience than emotional connection. There's nothing to tell, David. I hope you have a wonderful Thanksgiving with your wife and daughters. That night I did something I hadn't done in 3 years. I calculated my monthly budget without including their expenses. Without the $2,500 I'd been sending them every month, my financial picture looked dramatically different. I could afford to travel, to renovate my kitchen, to take the art classes I'd been putting off. I could build an emergency fund that wasn't constantly being depleted by their needs. More importantly, I could stop worrying about their financial stability and start focusing on my own life goals. At 62, I still had years ahead of me. Years I'd been spending as a supporting character in someone else's story instead of the protagonist of my own. Wednesday evening, as I was preparing vegetables for tomorrow's dinner with Helen, my doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I saw David standing on my porch, holding Emma and Sophie's hands. The girls were dressed in their school clothes, and David looked uncomfortable. I opened the door with a smile. What a nice surprise. Hello, my beautiful girls. Emma and Sophie hugged my legs, chattering about school and friends and the cards they'd made for me. Over their heads, David's eyes met mine, searching for something I couldn't quite identify. We were in the neighborhood, he said, which was obviously untrue since I lived 20 minutes from their house. The girls wanted to give you their cards. I invited them in, made hot chocolate for the girls, and admired their handmade cards with genuine appreciation. Emma had drawn our family as stick figures, and Sophie had attempted to write "We love Grandma" in crooked letters. They were sweet, innocent gestures from children who had no idea about the adult complications swirling around them. While the girls explored my living room, exclaiming over photos and trinkets they'd seen dozens of times before, David sat across from me at the kitchen table. "Mom, I need to ask you something, and I want you to be honest with me." I waited, curious about what he'd worked up the courage to say. "Are you mad at us about Thanksgiving?" "No," I said simply. "I'm not mad." "Then why does this feel like you're pulling away from us?" It was such a perceptive question, and for a moment I saw glimpses of the thoughtful boy I'd raised, the one who used to notice when I was sad and would bring me drawings to cheer me up. "I'm not pulling away, David. I'm stepping back. There's a difference." "What's the difference?" I looked at my granddaughters, who were now examining my bookshelf with the intense focus only children possess, and chose my words carefully. Pulling away would be emotional. Stepping back is practical. You and Melissa want space to build your own family traditions, and I'm giving you that space. But you've always been part of our family traditions. And now you're ready to create your own. That's normal, David. That's healthy. He frowned, like this wasn't the response he'd expected. It doesn't feel normal. It feels like something's broken. Nothing's broken, I said gently. Things are just changing. But even as I said it, I knew that wasn't entirely true. Something was broken, had been broken for a while. The balance between giving and receiving, between being appreciated and being taken for granted, between being family and being useful. I just wasn't sure if it could be fixed, or if it even should be. David gathered the girls to leave, and as they put on their coats, Emma looked up at me with serious 5-year-old eyes. "Grandma? Are you coming to our house tomorrow for the big dinner?" The room went silent. David's face flushed, and I could see him struggling with how to answer a question that revealed how little his daughters understood about the adult decisions being made around them. "Grandma has her own special dinner tomorrow," I said, kneeling down to Emma's level. "With her friend Helen. But I hope you have the most wonderful Thanksgiving with Mommy and Daddy." "Can we come to your dinner too?" Sophie asked innocently. "Sophie, no," David said quickly. "Grandma's dinner is for grown-ups." But Sophie's question hung in the air after they left, highlighting the absurdity of the situation. Here were my granddaughters, confused about why their grandmother wasn't joining their family celebration, while their parents acted like my absence was perfectly normal and reasonable. That night I made a decision that felt both inevitable and frightening. Tomorrow, after my dinner with Helen, I was going to sit down and write a letter to David and Melissa. Not an angry letter, not an accusatory one, but an honest one. I was going to tell them what I'd overheard, what I'd discovered about their mortgage, and what I'd realized about my role in their lives. But more importantly, I was going to tell them what was going to change going forward. Because Melissa was right about one thing. I had been assuming that money equaled family. I'd thought that if I made their lives easier, if I solved their problems and supported their dreams, I'd earn a permanent place in their hearts and their home. Instead, I'd made myself useful rather than essential, convenient rather than treasured. Tomorrow would be the beginning of discovering whether our relationship could survive without my financial contributions, or if that was all it had ever really been about. As I went to sleep Wednesday night, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Anticipation for my own plans that had nothing to do with anyone else's needs or expectations. Tomorrow I would have Thanksgiving with someone who wanted my company for its own sake. And the day after that, I would begin the conversation that would determine what kind of relationship, if any, I would have with my son's family, going forward. For the first time in 3 years, I was putting myself first. It felt terrifying and liberating in equal measure. Thanksgiving morning arrived crisp and clear, the kind of November day that makes you grateful for warm kitchens and good company. I woke up feeling genuinely excited for the first time in months, not because I had to coordinate everyone else's happiness, but because I was looking forward to my own plans. Helen arrived at my door at 10 o'clock sharp, carrying a casserole dish wrapped in a cheerful red towel, and wearing the biggest smile I'd seen on her face since her husband passed. She looked around my kitchen with genuine appreciation, taking in the golden turkey already roasting in the oven, the sweet potato casserole cooling on the counter, the fresh cranberries simmering in a pot on the stove. "Anna, this smells like heaven in here," she said, setting down her famous stuffing. I haven't had a real Thanksgiving in 3 years. My daughter always insists on hosting, but she orders everything from that fancy catering place downtown. Nothing tastes like home anymore. As we worked together in the kitchen, Helen told me stories about Thanksgivings past, about her late husband's terrible attempts at carving turkey, about the year their dog ate half the pie before anyone noticed. She asked about my traditions too, and I found myself sharing memories I hadn't thought about in years. How David used to insist on mashing the potatoes because it was the only cooking job I'd trust him with as a child. How my youngest daughter Sarah would sneak extra marshmallows onto the sweet potato casserole when she thought I wasn't looking. You have 4 children, Helen said as we set the table with my good china. Will any of the others be joining their families today? I paused in the middle of arranging napkins, realizing I hadn't even considered reaching out to my other children about Thanksgiving. Sarah lived in Portland with her partner and their teenage son. Michael was stationed overseas with the Navy. Rebecca was spending the holiday with her in-laws in Chicago. For years, our family gatherings had centered around David because he was the only one still living locally, and I'd fallen into the pattern of thinking his family was my only family option for holidays. They're all scattered, I said simply. David's family is here in town, so I usually spend holidays with them. Usually, Helen repeated gently. But not this year. Not this year, I confirmed, and found that saying it out loud didn't hurt the way I'd expected it to. By 2 o'clock, we were sitting down to a meal that felt more like a celebration than any dinner I'd had in months. Helen had brought wine, a bottle of Chardonnay she'd been saving for a special occasion. We toasted to new friendships, to unexpected blessings, to the courage to make changes when life wasn't working the way we'd planned. The conversation flowed easily, covering everything from gardening tips to book recommendations to stories about our late husbands. Helen had been married 47 years when her Robert died of a heart attack while mowing the lawn. She talked about him with the kind of fond exasperation that comes from a lifetime of love and compromise. Robert always insisted on cooking the turkey himself, she said, cutting into the perfectly golden bird I'd prepared. Bless his heart, he never could get the timing right. We ate dinner at 9 o'clock more years than not, because he'd start too late or cook it too long. But he was so proud of that turkey, I never had the heart to suggest maybe I should take over. I thought about my own Thanksgivings, how I'd gradually taken on more and more responsibility over the years, until I was planning, cooking, and hosting everything, while everyone else showed up as guests in my home. When had I stopped being a family member and started being the hired help? David used to help me when he was younger, I said, surprising myself by sharing the memory. He'd stand on a chair next to me and stir the gravy, or help me set the table. He was so serious about doing it right. They grow up, Helen said softly. Sometimes they grow away from us, and we have to decide whether to chase after them or let them find their own way back. It was such a wise observation, and it hit me with unexpected clarity. I'd been chasing David and his family for 3 years, financially and emotionally, trying to maintain a closeness that they clearly didn't want or appreciate. Instead of letting them miss me, I'd made myself so available, so useful that my absence would barely register. Until now. My phone buzzed during dessert, a text from David that simply said, "Hope you're having a nice day, Mom." I showed it to Helen, who read it with raised eyebrows. "That's it?" she asked. "No picture of the family? No wish you were here? No details about their day?" "That's it," I confirmed, sliding the phone back into my pocket without responding. "Sounds like someone's feeling guilty," Helen observed, cutting herself another slice of my apple pie. After Helen left around 6, loaded down with leftovers and promises to do this again soon, I sat in my quiet living room and reflected on the day. I'd had a genuinely wonderful Thanksgiving, filled with good food, meaningful conversation, and the pleasure of someone's company who actually wanted to be there. I hadn't spent the day managing other people's needs or walking on eggshells around family tensions. I hadn't been taken for granted or treated like background scenery in someone else's celebration. For the first time in years, I'd been the center of my own holiday experience. That evening, I did something I'd been putting off for days. I opened my laptop and began drafting the letter I'd been composing in my head all week. It needed to be honest but not harsh, clear but not accusatory. Most importantly, It needed to establish new boundaries that would protect both my financial resources and my emotional well-being. "Dear David and Melissa," I began, then deleted it and started over. This wasn't a formal business letter. This was a conversation about family, money, and respect that should have happened years ago. "David," I wrote instead, "there are some things we need to discuss, and I've decided it's easier to put them in writing so I can express myself clearly without getting emotional or sidetracked." I spent 2 hours crafting that letter, writing and rewriting sentences, until they said exactly what I meant. I explained what I'd overheard during Melissa's phone conversation. I detailed my research into their actual mortgage payment and what that revealed about their honesty regarding their financial situation. I listed every monthly expense I'd been covering and calculated the total amount I'd contributed over 3 years. But the heart of the letter wasn't about money. It was about respect and family and the difference between being needed and being used. "I realize now that my financial contributions haven't brought us closer together," I wrote. "Instead, they've created a dynamic where you expect my support but don't appreciate my presence." Melissa was right when she said I think money equals family. I did think that. I thought if I made your lives easier, if I solved your problems and eliminated your financial stress, I would earn a secure place in your family. Instead, I seem to have made myself dispensable everywhere except your bank account. The hardest part was writing about Thanksgiving, about the casual way they'd excluded me from a tradition I'd maintained for decades, as if my presence was optional rather than valued. "When you decided to have Thanksgiving without me, you made it clear that I'm not essential to your family celebrations. That's your right, and I respect your decision. But I hope you understand that if I'm not essential to your family, then my financial support shouldn't be essential to your lifestyle either." I outlined my new boundaries clearly and simply. Effective immediately, I would no longer be covering their mortgage, insurance premiums, or any other monthly expenses. I would continue to contribute to special occasions for the girls, birthdays and Christmas and school activities, but only at levels appropriate for a grandmother rather than a primary financial supporter. "This isn't punishment," I wrote. "This is me stepping back to let you build the independent family life you clearly want, without the complications my involvement seems to create. You're both capable adults with good jobs. You can afford your lifestyle without my help, you just haven't had to because I've been enabling you to spend money you didn't earn." The letter ended with an invitation for them to think about what kind of relationship they actually wanted with me, one based on mutual respect and genuine affection, rather than financial convenience and obligation. I printed 3 copies, one for my records, one to mail to them, and one to keep in my purse in case I needed to reference it during conversations. Then I sealed it in an envelope and placed it on my kitchen counter where I'd see it first thing in the morning. Friday morning, I woke up with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in years. I had plans that didn't revolve around anyone else's schedule or needs. I was going to mail the letter, do some Black Friday shopping for myself, and then spend the weekend reorganizing my house to reflect my new priorities. But first, I had a phone call to make. I dialed the number for David's mortgage company, a number I'd memorized from years of making payments on their behalf. When I reached the customer service department, I identified myself and requested to speak with someone about removing my automatic payment authorization. "I'd like to cancel the recurring payment that comes out of my account for loan number." I read the account number from my records. Effective immediately. The customer service representative was efficient and professional. She confirmed my identity, located the payment arrangement, and processed the cancellation within 10 minutes. She informed me that the next payment would not be withdrawn from my account, and that the primary borrowers would need to establish their own payment method before the 1st of December. "Is there anything else I can help you with today?" she asked. "Yes, actually. Could you tell me what the monthly payment amount is on that loan?" She pulled up the account details. "The monthly payment is $1,867, ma'am. $1,867. Not $1,500. Confirmation of what I'd already discovered, that they'd been lying to me about their mortgage payment for 3 years, pocketing the difference between what they told me they owed and what they actually owed. After I hung up, I called their car insurance company and canceled the automatic payment from my account for their premiums. Then I called their health insurance provider and removed my bank account from their payment methods. Each call took less than 15 minutes, but together they represented a complete financial separation from their daily lives. I felt lighter with each cancellation, like I was shedding weight I didn't realize I'd been carrying. For 3 years, I'd been financially responsible for their choices, their lifestyle, their security. Now they would be responsible for themselves, the way adults should be. I mailed the letter on my way to the shopping center, dropping it in the mailbox with a finality that felt both scary and exhilarating. By Monday, they would know exactly where things stood, and they'd have to decide how to handle both the financial reality and the relationship conversation. Black Friday shopping turned out to be more fun than I'd expected. Without the constant mental calculation of how much I was spending on other people, I could focus on things I actually wanted. I bought myself a new winter coat, something I'd been putting off because my old one was still functional. I purchased the expensive coffee maker I'd been admiring for months. I even splurged on a beautiful necklace that caught my eye in a jewelry store window. Each purchase felt like a small declaration of independence. This was my money, earned through decades of hard work and careful saving, and I was spending it on myself for the first time in years. Saturday morning brought the first response to my letter. David called at 8:30, his voice tight with what sounded like panic and confusion. "Mom, we need to talk. Can I come over?" "Of course," I said calmly, "but I should mention that I'm planning to go out around 11, so we'll have about 2 hours. Going out where?" The question surprised me. When had David started tracking my schedule? When had my activities become something he needed to know about and potentially approve? "Shopping," I said simply. "I'm redecorating my guest room." There was a pause. "Okay, I'll be there in 20 minutes. David arrived looking like he hadn't slept much. He was carrying my letter, crumpled from obviously being read multiple times. He sat down at my kitchen table without being invited, spread the letter out in front of him and stared at it like he was hoping the words might change if he looked at them long enough. "Mom, I don't understand what happened. We had a nice visit Wednesday night. The girls gave you their cards. Everything seemed fine." "Everything was fine," I said, pouring myself coffee and not offering him any. I wasn't angry or upset. I was just ready to have an honest conversation about our relationship. "But this," he gestured at the letter, "this feels like you're cutting us off, cutting off the girls." "I'm not cutting off anyone. I'm establishing boundaries that should have been in place years ago." David picked up the letter and reread a section silently. "You really overheard Melissa saying those things?" "Every word." "And you think we've been lying to you about our mortgage payment?" "I don't think it, David. I know it. I called the mortgage company yesterday and verified the actual payment amount. $1,867 a month, not $1,500. His face flushed red, and for a moment he looked like the little boy who'd been caught stealing cookies before dinner. "Mom, I can explain that." "I'm sure you can. The question is whether your explanation will be honest this time." He set the letter down and rubbed his face with both hands. "When we first asked for help, the payment was $1,500. But then we refinanced to get a better interest rate, and the payment went up. We were embarrassed to tell you it was higher than we'd originally said. So you decided to lie to me instead. We were going to tell you eventually." "When? After year 5 of taking my money under false pretenses?" David winced. "It wasn't like that, Mom. We weren't trying to cheat you." "Then what were you trying to do?" He was quiet for a long time, staring at his hands. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "We were trying to keep you from knowing how much we actually needed help. We thought if you knew the real payment, you'd think we were in over our heads financially." "You were in over your heads financially." "No, we weren't. We could afford the house, we just couldn't afford the house and everything else we wanted." There it was, the honest truth, finally. They could afford their basic expenses, but they wanted my money to subsidize their lifestyle choices, their extras, their comfort. They'd let me believe I was preventing them from losing their home when really I was paying for their vacations, their dining out, their shopping trips. "David, do you understand what you just said?" He looked up at me, confusion in his eyes. "You just admitted that you've been taking my money not because you needed it, but because you wanted it. You've let me worry about your financial stability for 3 years, let me sacrifice my own spending and saving goals to support you, when you could have managed your expenses perfectly well by making different choices about how you spend your own money." "Mom, it's not that simple. It's exactly that simple. You're both adults with good jobs and no major financial hardships. You don't need my money to survive. You want my money to live more comfortably than your income allows. There's a big difference. David stared at the letter again, and I could see him struggling with the reality of what I was saying. For 3 years, he'd been able to live like someone who made significantly more money than he actually did, because I'd been supplementing his lifestyle. Now he was facing the prospect of living within his actual means, and it was clearly a jarring adjustment to consider. "What about the girls?" he asked finally. "You said you'd still help with their activities and special occasions." "I will, but at appropriate levels. A grandmother's contribution to their lives, not a third parent's financial support. And holidays? Are you ever going to want to spend holidays with us again?" It was such a revealing question, not whether I'd be invited to spend holidays with them, but whether I'd want to. As if my exclusion from Thanksgiving had been my choice rather than theirs. "David, I wasn't the one who changed our holiday plans. You and Melissa decided you wanted a smaller celebration without me. I respected that decision and made my own plans." "But Melissa thinks you're mad about that." "I'm not mad. I'm clear. There's a difference." He frowned. "Clear about what? Clear about where I stand in your family? Clear about what my role is and isn't? Clear about what I will and won't accept going forward? And what won't you accept?" I looked at my son, this man I'd raised and sacrificed for and loved unconditionally for 33 years, and realized this might be the most important conversation we'd ever had. I won't accept being taken for granted. I won't accept being treated like my presence is a burden while my money is a blessing. I won't accept being excluded from family celebrations while being expected to fund your family lifestyle. And I won't accept being lied to about your financial situation while being guilted into providing support you don't actually need. David was quiet for several minutes, processing what I'd said. Finally, he asked, "What do you want from us, Mom?" "I want honesty. I want respect. I want to be included in your lives, because you value my company, not because you need my bank account. And I want you to take responsibility for your own financial decisions instead of relying on me to supplement your choices. And if we can't do that?" It was a fair question, and it deserved an honest answer. "Then we'll have a very limited relationship. I'll always love you, David, and I'll always love Emma and Sophie. But I won't continue to enable a dynamic that makes me feel used and unappreciated." He folded the letter carefully and put it in his pocket. "I need to talk to Melissa about all this." "I'm sure you do." As he stood to leave, he paused at the door. "Mom, for what it's worth, I'm sorry. About the mortgage payments. About not being honest. About Thanksgiving. I think somewhere along the way we stopped seeing you as our family and started seeing you as our solution to problems we didn't want to solve ourselves." It was the first genuine acknowledgement of responsibility I'd heard from him, and it meant more than he probably realized. "Thank you for saying that, David. It's a start." After he left, I sat in my kitchen and realized I felt calmer than I had in months. The conversation hadn't been easy, but it had been necessary. David now understood exactly where things stood, what had changed, and what would need to happen for our relationship to move forward in a healthy way. I spent the rest of the weekend reorganizing my house, starting with my home office where I kept all my financial records. I created a new filing system that separated my personal expenses from the records of money I'd given to David's family. Looking at those files side by side, I was shocked by how much of my financial life had been centered around their needs rather than my own goals. I also did something I'd been putting off for months. I made an appointment with a financial advisor to discuss my retirement planning. For 3 years, I'd been so focused on supporting David's family that I'd neglected my own long-term security. It was time to refocus on my future rather than subsidizing theirs. Sunday evening, I got a text from Melissa. It was longer than her usual brief messages, and the tone was different from her typical chirpy communications. "Anna, David told me about your letter and your conversation yesterday. I want you to know that I never meant for you to feel unwelcome or unappreciated. I was wrong to say what I said to my mother, and I was wrong to exclude you from Thanksgiving without talking to you directly first. You've done so much for our family, and I let my own discomfort with accepting help turn into resentment toward you. That wasn't fair, and I'm sorry. It was a more thoughtful apology than I'd expected from Melissa, and it suggested that my conversation with David had prompted some serious discussions between them. But apologies, while necessary, weren't enough to rebuild trust that had been damaged over years of being taken for granted. I texted back simply, "Thank you for the apology. I appreciate you taking responsibility for your part in this situation." Monday morning brought a call from David. His voice was more composed than it had been on Saturday, like he'd had time to process our conversation and figure out how to move forward. "Mom, I wanted to let you know that we've set up automatic payments from our own account for the mortgage and insurance. We should have done this years ago." "That's good, David. You'll feel better about your independence. We also wanted to ask if you'd be willing to have dinner with us next weekend. All of us, including Melissa. We'd like to talk about how to rebuild our relationship in a healthier way." It was exactly the kind of invitation I'd been hoping for, one that focused on relationship rather than obligation, on conversation rather than convenience. "I'd like that," I said. "Should I bring anything?" "Just yourself, Mom. We want to cook for you for once." After I hung up, I realized something had shifted. For the first time in years, I was being invited to dinner as a guest, rather than expected to provide the meal. It was a small change, but it represented a fundamental difference in how they were thinking about our relationship. That afternoon, I did something that felt both symbolic and practical. I went to the bank and opened a new savings account, one specifically designated for my own goals and dreams. I transferred the money I would have spent on David's family over the next year into that account, money that would now go toward my kitchen renovation, my travel plans, my art classes. Looking at that balance, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: excitement about my own future. For 3 years, I'd been so focused on making everyone else's life better that I'd forgotten I had my own life to live, my own dreams to pursue, my own happiness to prioritize. The woman who had started this week feeling excluded and unappreciated was ending it feeling empowered and hopeful. I discovered that I didn't need to be needed in order to be loved, and I didn't need to solve other people's problems in order to have value in their lives. Most importantly, I'd learned that saying no to being taken advantage of was really saying yes to being respected. And respect, I was beginning to understand, was the foundation that any healthy relationship needed to survive. The first Monday of December arrived with an unexpected phone call at 7 in the morning. David's voice was strained, almost panicked, cutting through my peaceful morning routine like an alarm clock. "Mom, we have a problem." The mortgage payment bounced. I set down my coffee cup slowly, unsurprised by this development, but curious about how he would handle it. "That's unfortunate. What happened?" "You know what happened. You canceled the automatic payment without giving us notice." The accusation in his tone was immediate and sharp, like somehow I was responsible for their failure to manage their own finances. I took a deep breath, reminding myself that this conversation was exactly what I'd expected and prepared for. "David, I sent you a detailed letter explaining exactly what was changing and when. You received it 4 days ago. You've had plenty of time to arrange your own payment. But Mom, we didn't think you were serious about the timeline. We thought we'd have more time to adjust our budget." More time to adjust their budget. As if 3 years of financial support hadn't been enough time to figure out how to pay their own bills. As if the prospect of covering their own mortgage was some kind of financial emergency rather than basic adult responsibility. How much time did you think you'd need to write a check for bills you've known about for 3 years? It's not that simple. We have other expenses, other commitments. We can't just suddenly come up with $1,800 a month. You mean you can't suddenly come up with $1,800 a month while maintaining the lifestyle you've become accustomed to with my help? There was a long silence on the other end of the line. I could hear Melissa in the background, her voice urgent and worried, though I couldn't make out the words. "Mom, can we please just talk about this? Maybe we can work out some kind of transition period. A transition period. Like weaning a child off a pacifier, except in this case it was weaning 2 adults off their financial dependence on someone they'd been treating poorly. David, you're 33 years old with a master's degree and a good job. Your wife has a college education and part-time employment. You don't need a transition period to figure out how to pay your own mortgage. You need to prioritize your spending differently. But what about Christmas? What about the girls' activities? There are things we've already committed to." And there it was, the real issue. They'd been spending money they didn't have because they'd assumed I would continue supplementing their lifestyle indefinitely. They'd made commitments and plans based on my financial support without ever asking if that support would continue. Those are choices you'll need to make based on your own budget, not mine. I could hear Melissa more clearly now, her voice rising with frustration. She was telling David to put me on speaker, that she wanted to talk to me directly. "Mom, Melissa wants to speak with you." "Hello, Anna?" Melissa's voice was tight with barely controlled anger. "I think we need to clear the air about some things." "I'm listening." "This whole situation feels like punishment for Thanksgiving. Like you're taking away your support because we hurt your feelings about one holiday." It was fascinating how Melissa could reduce 3 years of being taken for granted to hurt feelings about one holiday, as if my decision was purely emotional rather than practical and long overdue. "Melissa, this has nothing to do with Thanksgiving specifically. Thanksgiving was simply the moment I realized how you really feel about my place in your family." "That's not fair. You know we appreciate everything you've done for us." "Do I? Because from what I overheard, it sounds like you find my presence suffocating, and my involvement in your lives problematic." The line went quiet. Melissa hadn't expected me to address her comments directly, and she was clearly struggling with how to respond. "Anna, I was venting to my mother. I said things I didn't mean." "Which part didn't you mean? The part about me thinking money equals family, or the part about needing space from my involvement in your lives?" "I was frustrated, okay? Sometimes it feels like you're always here, always helping, always making suggestions. I felt like I couldn't make decisions about my own family without your input." Finally, some honesty. Melissa resented my presence even while she appreciated my money. She wanted my financial support without my actual involvement in their lives. "I understand. That's why I'm stepping back. You clearly want independence, and I'm giving it to you, but we still need help with some things." And there was the contradiction that summed up their entire attitude. They wanted independence from my presence, but dependence on my wallet. They wanted to make their own decisions, but have me pay for the consequences of those decisions. "Melissa, you can't have it both ways. You can't exclude me from your family celebrations while expecting me to fund your family lifestyle. You can't find my presence suffocating while finding my money essential." David took the phone back. "Mom, maybe we made some mistakes, but cutting off all support feels extreme." "I'm not cutting off all support, I'm cutting off unnecessary support. There's a difference." "What's the difference?" I'd been thinking about this question for weeks, preparing for exactly this conversation. The difference between helping family and enabling adults to avoid responsibility for their own choices. The difference is need versus want. I'll always help with genuine emergencies, real needs, situations you couldn't have anticipated or prepared for. But I won't continue funding lifestyle choices that you can afford yourselves if you prioritize differently. So if Emma needed surgery, you'd help. Of course. But you won't help with our mortgage anymore? Not unless you can't afford it after cutting out discretionary spending, and even then, only temporarily while you adjust your budget or increase your income. What do you consider discretionary spending? It was such a telling question. David genuinely didn't seem to understand the difference between needs and wants, between essential expenses and lifestyle choices. Eating out multiple times a week, Melissa's yoga classes and spa treatments, your premium cable package, the girls' expensive extracurricular activities, your weekend trips to the mountains, new clothes every season, the latest electronic gadgets. Each item I listed was met with silence, as if they'd never considered that these were choices rather than necessities. But those things are important to our quality of life, and they should be paid for with your own money, not mine. Mom, you don't understand. Our quality of life affects the girls too. Now they were trying to make this about my granddaughters, as if my refusal to subsidize their wants was somehow harming the children. David, Emma and Sophie need housing, food, clothing, education, healthcare, and love. Everything else is a bonus. You can provide all of their actual needs with your combined income. Whether you can also provide all of their wants depends on choices you make about your own spending. So you're saying we should tell the girls they can't do dance classes anymore? I'm saying you should decide whether dance classes are worth more to you than dining out, or worth more than your monthly spa visits, or worth more than upgrading your cars every few years. Those are parenting decisions that should be made based on your values and your budget, not subsidized by your mother. Melissa took the phone again. Anna, I think you're being incredibly selfish. These are your granddaughters we're talking about. Selfish. It was almost amusing that refusing to pay other people's bills was considered selfish, while expecting someone else to fund your lifestyle was apparently reasonable. Melissa, what's selfish is assuming that someone else should pay for your choices. What's selfish is lying about your mortgage payment for 3 years. What's selfish is excluding me from family holidays while expecting me to pay for your family expenses. We never asked you to pay for everything. You're right. You asked me to pay for specific things. And when I paid for those things, you found other expenses you needed help with. And when I helped with those, there were always more. You never asked me to pay for everything because you never had to. I kept offering, and you kept accepting until I was covering most of your discretionary income. The phone was quiet for a long moment. I could hear them whispering to each other, probably strategizing about how to handle this conversation. Anna, Melissa said finally, what if we agree to include you more in family activities? What if we make sure you're invited to holidays and family events? And there it was, the offer I'd been expecting. They were willing to trade access to family time for continued financial support. My presence in exchange for my money. Melissa, I don't want to be included because you need my financial help. I want to be included because you enjoy my company and value my relationship with the girls. We do value your relationship with them. Then, that relationship will continue regardless of whether I pay your bills. If you value my presence in their lives, you'll make sure I'm part of their lives, even without the financial incentive. David took the phone back. Mom, we're going to be honest with you. Without your help, we might have to make some major changes. Maybe sell the house, move to a smaller place, take the girls out of some activities. He was trying to make me feel guilty, trying to make their potential lifestyle adjustments my responsibility. But I'd learned something important over the past few weeks. Their choices were not my problems to solve. Those sound like reasonable options for people who want to live within their means. But the girls love this house. They love their dance classes and art lessons. And if those things are important to you, you'll find ways to afford them yourselves. Maybe Melissa will go back to work full-time. Maybe you'll take on freelance projects in the evenings. Maybe you'll cut back on your own spending to prioritize theirs. Those are all normal things that parents do when they can't afford everything they want for their children. You're really not going to change your mind about this? David, I'm 62 years old. I've worked hard my entire life, saved carefully, and made sacrifices to build financial security. I'm not going to spend my retirement years funding someone else's lifestyle choices, especially when those people have made it clear that my presence in their lives is more burden than blessing. That's not true, Mom. Then prove it. Show me that you value our relationship even without my financial contributions. Include me in your lives because you want me there, not because you need my money. And if we do that, will you consider helping us again in the future? It was still about the money. Even now, faced with the reality of paying their own bills, David was trying to negotiate a path back to my financial support. David, if you show me over time that you genuinely value me as a family member rather than a financial resource, if you demonstrate that you can manage your own expenses responsibly, if you treat me with respect and appreciation rather than taking me for granted, then maybe we can discuss occasional help with genuine emergencies or special circumstances. But the days of me supplementing your regular monthly budget are over. This is really hard, Mom. I'm sure it is. Learning to live within your means after years of living above them is always an adjustment. But it's an important life skill, and you're both capable of figuring it out. After I hung up, I realized my hands were shaking slightly, not from fear or regret, but from the adrenaline of finally standing firm on boundaries I should have established years ago. That conversation had been difficult but necessary, and I'd handled it exactly the way I'd planned. Within an hour, my phone was buzzing with text messages. First from David. Mom, I hope you'll reconsider. This is going to be really tough on the girls. Then from Melissa. Anna, I think you're making a mistake. Family should help family. Then from David again. We set up the mortgage payment, but we had to use our Christmas budget. The girls are going to have a very different holiday this year. Each message was designed to make me feel guilty, to convince me that their poor financial planning was somehow my responsibility. They were still trying to manipulate me into resuming my role as their financial safety net. I turned off my phone and spent the rest of the morning reorganizing my home office. I filed away all the records related to their expenses, placing them in a storage box labeled Closed Accounts. It felt symbolic, like officially ending a chapter of my life that had been draining rather than fulfilling. That afternoon, I did something I'd been postponing for months. I called my daughter Sarah in Portland and had a real conversation about my life, my finances, and my relationship with David's family. Sarah listened without judgment as I explained what had been happening and what I'd decided to change. "Mom, I'm proud of you," she said when I finished. "I've been worried about this situation for a while, but I didn't want to interfere." "You've been worried? Why didn't you say anything?" "Because you seemed happy to be helping them, and I didn't want to make you feel bad about your choices. But David has always been the one who expected the most from you, even when we were kids. It doesn't surprise me that he kept taking advantage of your generosity." It was enlightening to hear Sarah's perspective. As the youngest of my children, she'd always been more observant than the others, more aware of family dynamics and unspoken tensions. I kept thinking I was helping them build a stable life for the girls. "You were helping them avoid learning to build a stable life for themselves. There's a difference." Sarah's insight was exactly what I needed to hear. I hadn't been helping David and Melissa become more capable adults. I'd been enabling them to remain financially immature while expecting me to cover the difference between their income and their desired lifestyle. "What do you think will happen now?" I asked. "I think they'll figure it out. David's smart and Melissa's capable when she has to be. They've just never had to be because you've been there to solve their problems. And if they don't figure it out, then they'll learn some valuable lessons about prioritizing and budgeting. Either way, it's not your responsibility anymore." That evening, I made a decision that felt both practical and symbolic. I drove to David's house, not to deliver money or solve problems, but to see my granddaughters. I wanted to reassure myself that they were fine, that their parents' financial adjustment wouldn't actually harm them, and that my decision to step back was the right one. I knocked on the door instead of using my key, a small but significant change in how I approached their home. Melissa answered, looking tired and stressed but not hostile. "Anna, I wasn't expecting you. I wanted to see the girls. Are they available for a short visit?" Melissa hesitated, probably wondering if this was some kind of peace offering or negotiation attempt. "They're doing homework, but I'm sure they'd love to see you." Emma and Sophie greeted me with their usual enthusiasm, chattering about school projects and friends, and the upcoming holiday concert at school. They seemed completely unaware of their parents' financial stress, which was exactly as it should be. Children shouldn't be burdened with adult money problems. I spent an hour helping with homework, reading stories, and simply enjoying their company. They were happy, healthy, loved children whose lives would not be significantly impacted by their parents having to budget more carefully. As I prepared to leave, Melissa walked me to the door. "Anna, they really do love you, you know. This isn't about them not wanting you in their lives." "I know they love me, Melissa. The question is whether their parents will make sure I remain part of their lives now that I'm not part of your budget." "That's not fair." "It's completely fair. It's the most basic test of whether you value me as family or as a financial resource. We value you as family. Then act like it. Include me in family activities because you want me there, not because I'm paying for them." David appeared in the hallway, looking uncomfortable but determined to speak. "Mom, I've been thinking about what you said this morning, about priorities and choices. And? You're right. We have been living like we make more money than we do. We've been making decisions based on what we wanted rather than what we could afford." It was the first acknowledgement of financial responsibility I'd heard from him, and it was encouraging even if it had taken a crisis to prompt it. "That's a good realization, David. We're going to try to do better. Make a real budget, stick to it, stop assuming you'll cover the difference when we overspend." "I'm glad to hear that. But Mom, it's going to be hard. We're going to have to change a lot of things." "Change is hard. But it's also how people grow. Will you be patient with us while we figure this out?" It was such a different tone than the demanding, accusatory conversation we'd had that morning. David was actually asking for patience rather than demanding money, acknowledging that this was their problem to solve rather than mine to fix. Of course I'll be patient. But patience doesn't mean going back to the old arrangement. It means supporting you emotionally while you learn to support yourselves financially. Over the next 2 weeks, I watched David and Melissa's social media posts with interest. The frequent restaurant check-ins stopped. The shopping hauls and new purchases disappeared. Melissa's yoga studio posts became less frequent. David's weekend hiking gear photos were replaced with pictures of family activities at home. They were learning to live within their means, and from what I could see, their marriage wasn't falling apart and their children weren't suffering. They were simply adjusting their lifestyle to match their income, something they should have done years ago. The real test came the second week of December, when David called to invite me to Emma's school holiday concert. "It's next Thursday at 7, he said. "The girls have been practicing for months, and they're really excited about it. I'd love to come. Should I meet you there?" "Actually, we were hoping you could come to dinner first. Nothing fancy, just spaghetti and salad. But we thought it would be nice to spend some time together before the concert." It was exactly the kind of invitation I'd been hoping for, one that was about spending time together, rather than needing something from me. "That sounds wonderful. Should I bring anything?" "Just yourself, Mom. We've got everything covered." The dinner was simple, but genuine. David and Melissa seemed more relaxed than they had in months, like they'd stopped carrying the stress of living beyond their means. The girls were excited about their performance, practicing their songs between bites of spaghetti. During the concert, I sat with my son's family and felt something I hadn't experienced in years: inclusion without obligation. I was there because they wanted me there, because I was Emma and Sophie's grandmother, not because I was funding their evening out. After the concert, as we walked to our cars, Melissa touched my arm gently. "Anna, I wanted you to know that we've been talking a lot about what you said, about the difference between being needed and being valued. And what have you decided?" "We decided that we want you to feel valued, not just needed. We want you in the girls' lives because you're their grandmother, not because you make our lives easier." It was exactly what I'd hoped to hear, though I was cautious about accepting it too quickly. Actions would matter more than words over time. "I appreciate that, Melissa. It means a lot to hear you say it. We're also working on our budget, like you suggested. It's been an eye-opener, seeing where our money actually goes." "What have you discovered?" "That we were spending almost $1,000 a month on things we didn't really need. Restaurants, subscription services, impulse purchases. We never added it up before. $1,000 a month in discretionary spending, on top of the $2,500 I'd been contributing. They'd been living like people who made 6 figures while actually earning about $70,000 between them. What are you doing differently? Meal planning, cooking at home more, canceling subscriptions we don't use. Melissa's taking on more hours at the boutique. I'm doing some freelance web design in the evenings." They were finally taking responsibility for their financial choices, making adult decisions about how to balance their wants and needs within their actual income. "How does it feel?" David considered the question seriously. "Stressful at first, but actually kind of empowering now. Like we're finally in control of our money instead of always feeling like we're behind." "And the girls? How are they adjusting?" "Better than we expected," Melissa said. "We explained that we were going to try doing more fun things at home and fewer expensive activities out. They've actually enjoyed the extra family time." As I drove home that night, I reflected on how much had changed in just a few weeks. My relationship with David's family was evolving from one based on financial dependence to one based on mutual respect and genuine affection. They were learning valuable life skills they'd avoided developing while I was subsidizing their choices. Most importantly, I was rediscovering who I was beyond my role as the family problem solver and financial backup plan. I was Anna Baker, a woman with her own goals, interests, and dreams, not just someone's mother or grandmother or personal bank account. The holidays were approaching, and for the first time in years, I was looking forward to them as opportunities for genuine family connection rather than financial obligations I needed to manage. Christmas morning dawned clear and cold, and for the first time in years, I woke up without the familiar anxiety of orchestrating everyone else's perfect holiday. Instead of rushing to prepare elaborate meals or coordinate gift exchanges, I lay in bed for an extra hour, savoring my coffee and watching the snow fall outside my window. My phone buzzed with a text from David at 9:30. "Merry Christmas, Mom. The girls are so excited to show you what they made for you. Can you come by around 2?" The invitation was simple and genuine, without the underlying expectation of financial contribution that had shadowed previous holiday gatherings. I'd spent the past 3 weeks watching David and Melissa adjust to their new financial reality, and the transformation had been remarkable to witness. I texted back, "Merry Christmas, I'll be there at 2. Can't wait to see what the girls created." I'd been deliberate about my gift choices this year, selecting presents that reflected my new role as a grandmother rather than a financial supporter. For Emma and Sophie, I'd chosen art supplies and books, meaningful gifts that encouraged creativity and learning without being extravagant. For David and Melissa, I'd made photo albums filled with pictures from the girls' early years, personal gifts that cost time and thought rather than money. The shift in my gift-giving approach had been surprisingly liberating. Instead of feeling pressure to spend large amounts to demonstrate my love, I'd focused on choosing items that had genuine meaning and personal connection. When I arrived at their house, I was struck immediately by how different the atmosphere felt. The usual pre-holiday chaos was replaced by a calm energy that seemed to radiate from David and Melissa themselves. They'd always been stressed during holidays, worried about money and logistics and meeting expectations. Today, they seemed genuinely relaxed and happy. "Grandma Anna!" Emma launched herself into my arms before I'd even fully entered the house. "We made you something super special, but we have to wait until after dinner to show you." Sophie hung back slightly, suddenly shy, but her face was bright with excitement. "It's the best present ever, Grandma. We worked on it for weeks." The living room was decorated simply but warmly, with handmade ornaments and strings of lights creating a cozy atmosphere. I noticed immediately what was missing: the expensive electronic gifts, the designer clothes, the over-the-top decorations that had characterized their previous Christmas celebrations. "Girls, why don't you show Grandma Anna the tree while I finish getting dinner ready?" Melissa called from the kitchen. Her voice carried none of the frantic edge I'd grown accustomed to during holiday visits. Emma and Sophie led me to their Christmas tree, which was modest in size but beautifully decorated with what appeared to be entirely homemade ornaments. Paper snowflakes, salt dough figures painted in bright colors, construction paper angels with cotton ball halos. "We made all the decorations ourselves," Emma explained proudly. "Daddy helped us with the star on top, and Mommy showed us how to make the paper chains." "This is the most beautiful tree I've ever seen," I told them honestly. "It's so much more special than store-bought decorations." David appeared beside us, carrying a cup of coffee, and wearing an expression I hadn't seen on his face in years: genuine contentment. "The girls insisted on making everything themselves this year," he said. "It turned into a family project that lasted several weekends. We had more fun making the decorations than we've ever had shopping for them." It was a small comment, but it revealed something significant about how their perspective on holidays had shifted. They'd discovered that meaningful celebrations didn't require expensive purchases, that family time and creativity could be more valuable than commercial gifts. "How has the budgeting been going?" I asked quietly while the girls were busy rearranging ornaments on the lower branches. "Better than we expected," David admitted. "The first week was hard, mentally more than practically. We kept wanting to spend money on things we'd gotten used to buying without thinking. But now it feels normal, and we're actually enjoying it." "Enjoying it?" "Yeah. There's something satisfying about knowing exactly where our money goes. About making conscious decisions instead of just hoping everything will work out. We feel more in control of our lives." Melissa joined us, wiping her hands on a dish towel and smiling in a way that seemed more relaxed than any expression I'd seen from her in months. "Anna, I wanted to thank you," she said, her voice sincere. "I know this sounds strange, but these past few weeks have been really good for us. For our marriage, for our family." "How so?" "We're talking about money now instead of avoiding the subject. We're making decisions together instead of just spending and hoping for the best. We're focusing on what actually matters to us, instead of trying to keep up with some imaginary standard." It was exactly the kind of growth I'd hoped they might experience, though I'd been uncertain whether they'd be capable of making such a fundamental shift in their approach to money and priorities. "What's been the biggest change?" I asked. David and Melissa exchanged a look. The kind of communication that happens between couples who've been working through problems together. "The biggest change is that we're not anxious all the time," David said. "We were constantly worried about money, even though we weren't acknowledging it. We'd spend first and worry about paying for it later. Now we decide what we can afford before we spend it, and that eliminates the anxiety." "Also," Melissa added, "we're spending more time together as a family. When we weren't eating out or doing expensive activities every weekend, we had to get creative about entertainment. We've discovered that the girls actually prefer having us completely present at home to being dragged around to activities where we're distracted and stressed." I watched Emma and Sophie, who were now sprawled on the floor reading books together, sharing a large cushion and giggling over the pictures. They looked completely content, unaware that their parents had made any significant changes to their lifestyle. "How are the girls handling the adjustments?" "They haven't really noticed most of them," Melissa said. "We were worried they'd complain about not going out to eat as much, or not getting new toys as frequently, but they seem happier overall. I think they're responding to our reduced stress levels. The only thing they've asked about is why we're not visiting the toy store every weekend anymore," David added with a laugh. "But when we explained that we were saving money for more important things, like keeping our house and planning fun family activities, they accepted it easily." It was remarkable how adaptable children could be when their parents provided clear, honest explanations, rather than anxiety and confusion about family finances. Dinner was simple but delicious: roast chicken with vegetables, homemade bread, and a green salad. Everything was prepared from scratch, and the care that had gone into the meal was evident in both the taste and the presentation. "Melissa, this is wonderful," I said, and I meant it. "Did you cook everything yourself?" "I've been learning," she said with pride. "I never really knew how to cook properly before. I'd always relied on takeout or prepared foods. But when we started budgeting seriously, I realized how much money we were spending on convenience foods." "She's gotten really good at it," David added. "The girls are eating better too, more vegetables, less processed stuff. I've been watching cooking videos online and practicing new recipes every week," Melissa continued. "It's actually become a hobby, something I look forward to instead of a chore I have to rush through." As we ate, I marveled at how much calmer the family dynamic felt. Previous holiday meals had been punctuated by discussions of money worries, complaints about expenses, or tension between David and Melissa about spending decisions. Today, the conversation focused on the girls' school activities, books they'd been reading, plans for simple winter activities like sledding and building snowmen. After dinner, Emma and Sophie disappeared into the other room, whispering excitedly about the surprise they'd prepared for me. David and Melissa cleared the table together, moving around each other in the kitchen with an ease that suggested they'd been working as a team rather than living in separate spheres of responsibility. "Anna," Melissa said as she loaded the dishwasher, "I owe you a bigger apology than the one I gave you before." "For what?" "For not understanding what you were trying to tell us about money and family. I thought you were being controlling when you were actually trying to help us become more independent." "I don't think I was very clear about my concerns at first," I admitted. "I kept giving you money because I thought that was how I showed love, but I wasn't helping you develop the skills you needed to succeed on your own." "We were taking advantage of your generosity," David said, joining our conversation. "Not intentionally, but we were. We got comfortable letting you solve our financial problems instead of learning to solve them ourselves." "What made you realize that?" "When you stopped helping, and we discovered we could actually handle our expenses on our own," Melissa said. "We just had to want it more than we wanted the extra things we'd been buying." "It was a wake-up call," David added. "We were living like people who made $30,000 more per year than we actually do. That's not sustainable, and it wasn't fair to you." Before I could respond, Emma and Sophie returned, carrying between them a large poster board covered with a sheet. They were practically vibrating with excitement as they positioned it in front of my chair. "Ready, Grandma?" Emma asked, her hand on the corner of the sheet. Ready? They pulled away the sheet to reveal a collage of photos, drawings, and handwritten notes titled, "Why We Love Grandma Anna." The photos were pictures of me with the girls from various occasions over the past few years, reading stories, helping with art projects, attending school events, baking cookies together. But it was the handwritten notes that made my throat tighten with emotion. In Emma's careful printing, Grandma Anna always listens to my stories and never says they're too long. In Sophie's crooked letters, Grandma makes the best cookies and always saves me the bowl to lick. Around the edges of the poster, they'd drawn pictures of memories we'd shared. The time we built a blanket fort in my living room, the afternoon we planted flowers in my garden, the day we made homemade Play-Doh and ended up with purple hands. "Do you like it, Grandma?" Sophie asked, bouncing on her toes. "I love it more than any gift I've ever received," I said, and I meant every word. "This is the most thoughtful, beautiful present anyone has ever made for me." The girls beamed with pride, and I could see David and Melissa watching the exchange with soft expressions. This was exactly the kind of gift that demonstrated love and connection without requiring money, creativity, and time, instead of purchasing power. "We wanted to show you all the reasons we love you that aren't about presents or money," Emma explained, with the serious tone children use when they're saying something important. "Mommy and Daddy helped us think of all the special things you do with us. Like how you always remember which stories are our favorites," Sophie added, "and how you taught us to make friendship bracelets. And how you come to all our school shows even when they're boring," Emma continued. I looked at this poster, created by two little girls who wanted to express their love for their grandmother, and realized this was what I'd been missing during all those years of buying elaborate gifts and paying for expensive activities. The girls didn't love me because I spent money on them. They loved me because I spent time with them, because I paid attention to their interests, because I made them feel heard and valued. "Can we hang it in your house, Grandma?" Sophie asked. "In a place where you'll see it every day?" "It's going to hang in my kitchen," I promised, "right where I eat breakfast every morning so I can see it first thing when I wake up." As the afternoon continued, I watched my family with new eyes. David and Melissa seemed more connected to each other and more present with their daughters. The financial stress that had been underlying every interaction for years was gone, replaced by a sense of confidence and control that made everything feel more relaxed. When it came time for gift exchange, I was curious to see how they'd approach Christmas presents with their new budgeting priorities. The gifts under their tree were fewer than in previous years, but each one seemed chosen with more care and thought. Emma and Sophie loved the art supplies I'd brought, immediately opening the packages and spreading markers and colored pencils across the coffee table to begin new projects. David and Melissa spent several minutes looking through the photo albums I'd made, pointing out pictures and sharing memories with the girls. "Mom, this must have taken you hours," David said, studying a page that documented Emma's first steps. "These are incredible." "It was time well spent," I said. I enjoyed going through all the photos and remembering how quickly they've grown. The gifts they'd chosen for me were equally thoughtful. A beautiful scarf that Melissa had knitted herself, learning the skill from online tutorials, and a wooden cutting board that David had made in his friend's woodworking shop during his lunch breaks. "I didn't know you could knit," I told Melissa, admiring the intricate pattern and soft yarn. "I couldn't until 3 weeks ago," she laughed. I decided I wanted to make something personal, instead of buying something generic. It took me 17 tries to get the pattern right. "And I didn't know you did woodworking, David." "I don't, really. But my friend Steve has been teaching me some basic skills. It's been a good stress reliever after work, and I like the idea of making useful things with my hands." These gifts represented something more valuable than their monetary cost. They represented time, effort, learning new skills, and personal investment. They were gifts that couldn't be purchased on a whim or charged to a credit card. They required planning, patience, and genuine care. As the evening wound down and it came time for me to leave, I felt a contentment I hadn't experienced during family gatherings in years. I'd been included not because they needed something from me, but because they wanted me there. The girls' gift had focused on our relationship and shared experiences rather than material things I'd provided, David and Melissa had demonstrated through their actions and attitudes that they valued me as a family member rather than a financial resource. "Mom," David said as I put on my coat, "I wanted you to know that this has been our best Christmas in years." "Why do you think that is?" "Because we weren't worried about money the whole time. We weren't stressed about how we were going to pay for everything or guilty about spending money we couldn't afford. We could just focus on enjoying each other's company." "Also," Melissa added, "because we put effort into making it special, instead of just buying our way to a good time. Everything felt more meaningful when we had to be creative and thoughtful instead of just writing checks." As I drove home, I reflected on the profound changes that had occurred in our family dynamic over the past month. By refusing to continue enabling their financial irresponsibility, I'd forced them to develop skills and perspectives that had ultimately made them happier and more stable. They discovered that living within their means didn't require sacrifice so much as it required intentionality. They'd learned that meaningful family experiences came from attention and creativity rather than expense accounts. Most importantly, they'd realized that their relationship with me was valuable independent of any financial benefits I might provide. The next few weeks brought a series of small interactions that reinforced these positive changes. David called regularly, not to ask for money or help with problems, but to share news about his work projects and the girls' activities. Melissa sent me pictures of meals she'd cooked and crafts the girls had made, genuine sharing rather than requests for assistance. In mid-January, I received a call that tested everyone's commitment to our new family dynamic. David's voice was stressed when he called on a Wednesday evening. "Mom, I have a problem and I need to talk through some options with you." My first instinct was the familiar flutter of anxiety about what financial crisis might be developing, but I pushed that aside and focused on listening. "What's happening?" "My car needs major repairs. The transmission is failing, and the mechanic says it's going to cost about $3,000 to fix. Or, I need to replace the vehicle entirely." This was exactly the kind of situation that would have prompted an automatic offer of financial help in the past, but I waited to hear what he was thinking before responding. "What are your options?" "Well, I've been researching used cars, and I can get something reliable for around $8,000. We have about $2,000 in our emergency fund that we've been building, so we'd need to finance the rest." "That sounds reasonable. What's your concern?" "I'm nervous about taking on a car payment when we're still adjusting to our budget, but I also don't want to put $3,000 into a 12-year-old car that might have other problems." It was such a mature, thoughtful approach to a financial decision. David was considering multiple factors, thinking long-term, and working within the constraints of his actual financial situation, rather than assuming someone else would solve the problem. What does Melissa think? She agrees that buying used makes more sense than repairing, but she's worried about the monthly payment affecting our other goals. What other goals? We're trying to save for a real vacation next summer, something we can pay for in cash instead of putting on credit cards. And we want to build our emergency fund up to 6 months of expenses. I was impressed by their financial planning and goal setting. They were thinking strategically about their money, instead of just reacting to immediate needs. "Have you calculated how a car payment would fit into your monthly budget?" "Yeah, we ran the numbers last night. If we get financing for $6,000 over 4 years, the payment would be about $150 a month. We can handle that if we adjust our discretionary spending slightly." "It sounds like you've thought this through carefully. What kind of advice are you looking for?" "I guess I just wanted to talk it through with someone who has more experience with these kinds of decisions." "Do you think we're making the right choice?" It was such a different conversation than we would have had 6 months ago. Instead of asking me to solve the problem financially, David was asking for guidance and perspective, while taking responsibility for finding his own solution. "I think you're approaching this exactly the right way," I told him. "You're considering both the immediate and long-term costs, you're working within your actual budget constraints, and you're being realistic about what you can afford. Those are all signs of good financial decision-making." "Thanks, Mom. It helps to talk it through with someone." "David, I'm proud of how you're handling this. A year ago, this kind of situation would have been a crisis. Now it's just a decision you need to make thoughtfully." "It feels different," he agreed. "Less scary. We know we can handle unexpected expenses because we've been planning for them." After we hung up, I realized something significant had just happened. My son had faced a financial challenge and worked through it responsibly without expecting me to provide a solution. More importantly, he'd asked for advice and emotional support rather than money, treating me like a trusted family member rather than a backup bank account. 2 weeks later, David called to update me on the car situation. They'd found a 3-year-old sedan with low mileage, financed it through their credit union at a reasonable interest rate, and were completely comfortable with the monthly payment. The best part, he said, is that we don't have any anxiety about it. We know exactly how it fits into our budget, and we're not worried about making the payments. That's a wonderful feeling, isn't it? It really is. I can't believe we used to make major purchases without this kind of planning. No wonder we were always stressed about money. As winter turned to spring, I continued to observe the positive changes in my family's approach to both money and relationships. David and Melissa had maintained their new financial habits, continuing to live within their means while building their emergency fund and planning for future goals. More importantly, our family relationships had evolved in ways that felt healthier and more sustainable. I was included in family activities based on mutual enjoyment rather than financial obligation. The girls spent time with me because they loved my company, not because I was funding their entertainment. In April, Melissa surprised me with a phone call that revealed just how much their perspective had shifted. "Anna, I wanted to ask you something, and I want you to feel completely free to say no." "What is it?" "David and I have been talking about planning a summer vacation, something we can afford with our own money. We were wondering if you'd like to join us as our guest." The offer was so unexpected and so completely different from previous vacation discussions that I was momentarily speechless. "You want me to join your family vacation?" "We do. We've realized that some of our best family memories include you, and we'd love to create new ones together. We've been looking at rental houses at the beach that could accommodate all of us comfortably." "And you'd be paying for this yourselves?" "Completely. We've been saving specifically for this trip. It's part of our new approach to money management, planning for things we want instead of just hoping we'll figure out how to pay for them later." I was deeply moved by the invitation, both because it represented their desire to include me in their family experiences and because it demonstrated how much they'd grown in their financial responsibility. "I would love to join you," I said. "What can I contribute?" "Just your company," Melissa said. "Though if you want to help with meal planning and cooking, that would be wonderful. You're so much better at that than I am." "I'd be happy to help with meals." "It sounds like a wonderful trip." As I hung up the phone, I realized that we'd achieved something I hadn't dared to hope for when I first made the decision to step back financially. We'd rebuilt our family relationships on a foundation of mutual respect and genuine affection, rather than financial convenience and obligation. The journey had been difficult and sometimes painful, but it had led to exactly the kind of family dynamic I'd always wanted. One where everyone contributed according to their abilities, where relationships were based on love rather than money, and where I was valued for who I was rather than what I could provide. Most importantly, David and Melissa had discovered capabilities they never knew they possessed. They'd learned to live within their means, to plan for their goals, to handle unexpected challenges, and to create meaningful family experiences without relying on someone else's financial support. As I looked forward to our summer vacation together, I felt grateful for the courage I'd found to establish boundaries that had seemed so frightening at the time. By refusing to continue enabling their financial dependence, I'd helped them discover their own strength and independence. And in the process, I'd rediscovered my own worth as a family member, who deserved to be valued for more than the size of my bank account. The beach house vacation in July exceeded every expectation I'd dared to have. David and Melissa had chosen a charming cottage just 2 blocks from the ocean, with enough space for all of us to be comfortable without feeling crowded. What struck me most was how they'd planned every detail themselves, from researching the best rental properties to coordinating meal planning and activity schedules. On our first morning, I woke early and found Melissa already in the kitchen, preparing coffee and laying out ingredients for pancakes. She was humming softly to herself, moving with the confidence of someone who'd truly learned to enjoy cooking rather than viewing it as a chore. "You're up early," I said, accepting the cup of coffee she offered. "I wanted to get breakfast started before the girls wake up," she replied. "I've been looking forward to cooking in this kitchen all week. Look at this view while we cook." The kitchen window faced the ocean, and we could see Emma and Sophie's sandcastles from the previous day still standing on the beach below. It was the kind of peaceful scene that money couldn't buy, created simply by choosing a location thoughtfully and taking time to appreciate it. Melissa, I have to tell you how impressed I am with how you've planned this trip. She smiled, an expression of genuine pride rather than the defensive reactions that used to characterize our conversations about family decisions. It felt good to do it ourselves, to know that everything we're enjoying here, we've earned and paid for. There's no anxiety about credit card bills when we get home, no stress about money we don't have. David emerged from the bedroom, hair tousled from sleep, looking more relaxed than I'd seen him in years. He wrapped his arms around Melissa from behind as she flipped pancakes, and I could see the easy affection between them that had been strained during their financially stressful period. "Morning, Mom," he said, reaching for his own coffee. "Sleep well?" "Wonderfully, this place is perfect. We got lucky finding it." Melissa spent weeks researching options within our budget range. She probably looked at 50 different rental properties before settling on this one. The fact that they'd had a budget range and stuck to it, that they'd done research and comparison shopping rather than simply booking the first appealing option they found, represented such a fundamental shift in their approach to major purchases. Emma and Sophie bounded into the kitchen moments later, still in their pajamas but already chattering about their plans for the day. Beach activities, sandcastle competitions, searching for shells, all simple pleasures that required nothing more than time and imagination. "Grandma Anna, will you help us build the biggest sandcastle ever?" Emma asked, climbing onto my lap while I drank my coffee. "We want to make one with rooms inside," Sophie added. "Like a real castle where people could live." "I would love to help you build a castle palace," I said, already looking forward to an afternoon spent focused entirely on my granddaughter's creative projects. As the week unfolded, I observed family dynamics that felt completely different from any vacation we'd shared before. David and Melissa were present and engaged with the girls, rather than distracted by financial worries or guilty about expenses they couldn't afford. They'd planned activities that emphasized family time and natural entertainment, rather than costly attractions or expensive meals. We spent our days building elaborate sand sculptures, collecting shells, playing board games during afternoon heat breaks, and cooking meals together in the cottage kitchen. In the evenings, we walked along the shore or sat on the deck sharing stories and watching the sunset. On the third day, as we were returning from a morning beach walk, Emma ran ahead to explore a tide pool she'd discovered while Sophie hung back to walk with me. "Grandma Anna," she said, slipping her small hand into mine, "this is the best vacation ever." "What makes it the best?" "Because Mommy and Daddy aren't worried about anything. They're just happy and fun, and we get to do everything together." It was such a perceptive observation from a 6-year-old. Sophie had recognized that her parents' emotional state affected the entire family atmosphere, and she could sense the difference between their current contentment and their previous anxiety. "Sometimes grown-ups worry about things that don't really matter," I said carefully. "And when they stop worrying about those things, they can focus on what's really important. Like building sandcastles and looking for crabs." Exactly like that. That evening, after the girls were asleep, David, Melissa, and I sat on the deck sharing a bottle of wine they'd brought from home and talking about the changes that had occurred in their lives over the past 8 months. "I've been thinking about last Christmas," Melissa said, "and how different it felt from previous holidays. We were so much more relaxed and happy, but we spent probably a third of what we usually did." "What do you think made the difference?" I asked. "We weren't trying to buy our way to a perfect holiday," David answered. "We were actually creating it through effort and attention instead of purchases." "Also," Melissa added, "we weren't stressed about money, so we could enjoy the experiences we were having instead of worrying about what they were costing." "Do you miss anything about your old lifestyle?" I was curious whether they felt deprived or restricted by their new financial boundaries. David and Melissa exchanged a look, clearly having discussed this question between themselves. "Honestly, no," Melissa said. "I thought I would miss the spontaneous shopping trips and frequent dinners out, but I've discovered I enjoy planning and anticipating things more than I ever enjoyed impulse purchases. The only thing I miss is the illusion that we didn't have to think about money, David said. But that was never really true anyway. We were always worried about money, we just weren't being honest about it. Now when we spend money on something, it feels good because we know we can afford it and we've chosen it deliberately, Melissa continued. When we were overspending, even fun purchases came with guilt and anxiety. As I listened to them reflect on their financial journey, I realized they'd learned lessons that went far beyond budgeting and money management. They'd discovered the difference between instant gratification and lasting satisfaction, between appearing successful and actually being stable, between reacting to desires and making conscious choices. On our last day at the beach, I found myself sitting alone on the deck early in the morning, watching the sunrise and reflecting on the path that had brought us to this point. 8 months ago, I'd been a woman who felt invisible in her own family, taken for granted, and valued primarily for financial contributions. I'd been enabling 2 adults to avoid responsibility for their choices while accepting exclusion from family celebrations. Now I was sitting in a vacation rental that my son and daughter-in-law had researched, planned, and paid for themselves, looking forward to a day spent with grandchildren who loved me for my attention and presence rather than my gifts, feeling valued as a family member rather than a financial resource. The transformation hadn't been easy or immediate. There had been difficult conversations, hurt feelings, and periods of uncertainty about whether our relationships would survive the changes I'd insisted upon. But the result was a family dynamic that felt healthier and more sustainable than anything we'd had before. Emma appeared beside me, carrying her favorite stuffed animal and wearing the serious expression she got when she had something important to say. "Grandma Anna, I'm sad that vacation is ending. I'm sad too, sweetheart. But we'll always have the memories we made here. Will we do this again next year?" "I hope so. Would you like that?" "Yes, but only if Mommy and Daddy are still happy like they are now." It was such a wise observation from a 7-year-old. Emma had recognized that her parents' happiness wasn't dependent on external circumstances, but on their internal state of mind, their approach to life and money and family relationships. "I think they will be happy, Emma. They've learned some important things about what really makes people happy." "Like what?" "Like spending time with people you love. Like being grateful for what you have instead of always wanting more. Like working together as a family instead of worrying about problems alone." Emma nodded solemnly, processing this information with the intensity children bring to concepts that adults often take for granted. When we returned home from vacation, I expected some regression to old patterns, some difficulty readjusting to regular routines after the relaxed atmosphere of the beach cottage. Instead, David and Melissa seemed to have integrated the lessons of our week together into their daily lives. They'd experienced firsthand what it felt like to enjoy something they'd earned and planned for themselves, without debt or anxiety or dependence on anyone else's financial support. They'd seen how much more present and relaxed they could be when they weren't carrying the stress of living beyond their means. In August, I received a call from Sarah in Portland that provided an outside perspective on the changes in our family. "Mom, I talked to David last week, and he sounds like a completely different person." "How so?" "He's excited about things. His job, his family, their plans for the future. He used to always sound stressed and tired when we talked, like he was barely keeping up with his life. Now he sounds energetic and confident. They've made some significant changes in how they approach money and planning." He told me about that. He also told me about what happened with Thanksgiving last year and how you stopped helping them financially. I waited, curious about what David had shared with his sister and how Sarah had interpreted the situation. "Mom, I'm proud of you for setting those boundaries. David needed to learn those lessons, and you couldn't teach them to him by continuing to enable his poor financial decisions. It was hard to do. I worried about damaging our relationship." "You strengthened your relationship. David respects you more now than he has in years. He talks about you differently, like he sees you as a person with your own needs and goals, instead of just someone who's always available to solve his problems." Sarah's perspective was particularly valuable because she'd observed our family dynamics from a distance, without being emotionally invested in the immediate conflicts, but with enough insight to recognize the long-term patterns. "What made you realize he needed that kind of tough love?" she asked. I finally understood that I wasn't helping him by preventing him from experiencing the natural consequences of his choices. I was protecting him from learning skills he needed to develop. And now he's developed those skills. He and Melissa both have. They're managing their finances responsibly, planning for their goals, handling unexpected challenges without panic. Most importantly, they're enjoying their lives instead of constantly worrying about money. In September, Emma started 2nd grade and Sophie began kindergarten, milestones that previous years would have triggered requests for financial help, with school supplies, new clothes, and various fees. This year, David and Melissa handled all the back-to-school expenses themselves, even sending me pictures of the girls with their new backpacks and supplies as proud updates rather than subtle requests for assistance. The pictures showed Emma and Sophie looking confident and excited about their new school year, wearing clothes that were practical rather than designer but chosen with care and within a realistic budget. "They look wonderful," I texted back, "ready for a great year." "We're all ready," Melissa replied. "The girls are excited, and David and I feel prepared for whatever the school year brings." Prepared. It was such a different mindset from the reactive, crisis management approach that had characterized their previous attitude toward family finances and planning. In October, David called with news that demonstrated just how much their financial perspective had evolved. "Mom, I got offered a promotion at work. It comes with a significant salary increase, and I wanted to talk through some ideas with you." My first thought was curiosity about what kind of advice he was seeking. In the past, unexpected income would have immediately translated into lifestyle inflation, new purchases, or expanded commitments that would quickly absorb any additional money. "Congratulations! That's wonderful news. What kind of ideas are you considering?" "Well, the increase would be about $15,000 a year after taxes. Melissa and I have been talking about how to use it wisely instead of just letting our spending expand to fill the extra income." The fact that they were proactively planning how to handle additional money rather than simply spending it represented such a fundamental shift in their financial maturity. "What options are you considering?" "We want to accelerate our emergency fund to a full 6 months of expenses. We're thinking about starting college savings accounts for the girls, and we'd like to increase our retirement contributions significantly." Those all sound like excellent priorities. The thing is, none of those goals would improve our lifestyle immediately, but we think they're more important than spending the money on things we want right now. "What made you decide to prioritize long-term security over immediate gratification?" This year taught us that financial security feels better than expensive purchases. We're happier knowing we can handle unexpected expenses than we ever were when we were spending money we didn't have on things we didn't really need. It was exactly the kind of wisdom that I'd hoped they might develop, but that they'd needed to discover through their own experience, rather than through lectures or advice from me. As November approached, I found myself curious about how we would handle Thanksgiving this year. The holiday held such significance as the anniversary of their decision to exclude me and my subsequent choice to establish financial boundaries. I wondered whether they would acknowledge the date, reference the changes that had occurred, or simply treat it as a normal family celebration. 2 weeks before Thanksgiving, Melissa called with an invitation that felt both familiar and completely different from any we'd shared before. "Anna, we've been talking about Thanksgiving, and we want to do something special this year. We'd love to host dinner at our house, with you as our guest of honor." "Guest of honor?" "We want to cook the entire meal ourselves and invite you to join us for a celebration focused on gratitude and family. We have so much to be thankful for this year, and a lot of it is because of the wisdom you shared with us, even when it was difficult to hear." I was deeply moved by the invitation and the spirit behind it. They were taking responsibility for hosting and cooking, while acknowledging that my guidance had contributed to the positive changes in their lives. "I would be honored to join you." "There's something else," Melissa continued. "We've invited Helen to join us too, if she's available. We know how much your friendship with her has meant to you, and we'd love to include her in our family celebration." The inclusion of Helen represented such thoughtful consideration of my relationships and priorities beyond their immediate family. It showed that they'd recognized my growth and independence over the past year, rather than expecting me to remain focused exclusively on their needs. That's incredibly thoughtful. I'll ask her, but I'm sure she'll be delighted. We're planning to start cooking early in the morning, and we'd love for you to join us in the kitchen if you want to. Not because we need help, but because some of our best family memories happen when we're cooking together. Thanksgiving morning arrived gray and drizzly, but the atmosphere in David and Melissa's kitchen was warm and cheerful. I arrived at 9 o'clock to find them already deep into meal preparation, working together with an efficiency that spoke of careful planning and shared responsibility. Emma and Sophie were stationed at the kitchen table, carefully arranged cranberries in patterns for a homemade sauce, their faces serious with concentration, as they contributed to the family meal. "Grandma Anna," Emma called when she saw me. "Look how pretty our cranberries are. We're making the sauce all by ourselves." "It's going to be the most beautiful cranberry sauce ever made," I told them, admiring their careful work. Helen arrived at 10:30, carrying a pie and wearing her best dress, her face bright with the pleasure of being included in a family celebration. She and Melissa quickly fell into conversation about cooking techniques and recipe modifications, bonding over their shared enthusiasm for preparing food from scratch. As we worked together in the kitchen, I observed the easy collaboration between David and Melissa, the way they anticipated each other's needs and shared tasks without discussion or negotiation. They'd learned to function as a true partnership, supporting each other rather than existing in parallel but separate spheres. "Anna," Helen said during a quiet moment while David carved the turkey, "this feels like such a warm, genuine family celebration. Everyone seems so relaxed and happy." "It's been a year of significant growth for all of us," I replied, watching my granddaughters help their father arrange slices of meat on the serving platter. "Growth can be painful, but it's always worth it in the end." The dinner conversation was rich with expressions of genuine gratitude. David spoke about appreciating the security that came from living within their means. Melissa shared her pride in the cooking skills she'd developed and the creativity she discovered in meal planning and preparation. Emma was thankful for her new teacher and the friends she'd made in second grade. Sophie expressed gratitude for her kindergarten classroom and the books she was learning to read. Helen talked about the friendship we'd developed and how much our weekly coffee visits meant to her. I shared my appreciation for the changes in our family relationships and the joy of watching David, Melissa, and the girls flourish in their new approach to life and money. As the afternoon progressed and we moved from dinner to board games in the living room, I reflected on the journey we'd all taken over the past year. 12 months ago, I'd been excluded from this family's Thanksgiving celebration, feeling unappreciated and taken for granted despite my significant financial contributions to their lifestyle. Today I was sitting in their living room as an honored guest, included because they valued my presence and wanted to share their gratitude with me. They'd prepared and paid for the entire celebration themselves, demonstrating the independence and capability they'd developed since taking responsibility for their own financial decisions. Most importantly, the relationships around me felt authentic and sustainable. David and Melissa had learned to appreciate help without becoming dependent on it, to accept guidance without surrendering their autonomy, to include me in their lives because they loved me, rather than because they needed something from me. As evening approached and it came time for Helen and me to leave, Emma and Sophie hugged us, goodbye with the unself-conscious affection of children who felt secure and loved. "When will we see you again, Grandma Anna?" Sophie asked. "Soon, sweetheart. Maybe this weekend we can do some holiday baking together." "Will you teach us how to make those cookies with the jam in the middle?" "We'll make a whole afternoon of cookie baking," I promised. David walked us to our cars, his expression serious but peaceful in the driveway light. "Mom, I wanted to thank you for this year, for everything you taught us, even when we didn't want to learn it." "You did the learning, David. I just stopped preventing you from experiencing the lessons. I know it wasn't easy for you to step back when you could see us struggling. The hardest part was trusting that you were capable of figuring things out on your own, but you proved that trust was justified. We're better people now, better parents, better partners, better at managing our lives, and we're happier, which I didn't expect when we first had to start budgeting and cutting expenses." As I drove home that evening, I felt a deep satisfaction that had nothing to do with gratitude or recognition and everything to do with witnessing genuine growth and positive change. I'd helped my son's family not by solving their problems, but by refusing to prevent them from developing the skills they needed to solve problems themselves. The year had taught me valuable lessons too. I'd learned the difference between being needed and being valued, between enabling and supporting, between giving help and giving independence. I'd discovered that stepping back from someone's problems could be a greater gift than stepping in to solve them. Most importantly, I'd rediscovered my own worth as a person with interests, goals, and relationships that existed independently of my role as someone's mother or grandmother or financial supporter. I was Anna Baker, a woman who'd raised 4 children, built a successful career, developed financial security through careful planning, and learned to set boundaries that protected both my resources and my emotional well-being. As I settled into my favorite chair that evening with a cup of tea and the newspaper, I felt grateful for the courage I'd found to make difficult changes when our family relationships weren't working. The transformation had been challenging and sometimes painful, but it had led to exactly the kind of authentic, respectful family dynamic I'd always hoped we could achieve. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.